This video is sponsored by Skillshare, the online learning community with classes to fit thousands of desired skills. I use Skillshare to learn new things, bolster my existing skill sets, or broaden my knowledge to take my aspiration further. It's been pretty cool for me. With premium membership, you can get unlimited access to all sorts of classes, including a whole host of animation courses like this step-by-step walkthrough of simple character animation from Fraser Davidson. Once you've got these kind of skills under your belt, you can build on them and feel the freedoms of having that in your arsenal. An annual subscription to Skillshare is less than $10 a month. But thanks to this sponsorship, you don't need to commit straight away. Using the link in the description below, you can get a 2-month free trial. Leap in, try lots of classes and see the potential. Click the link below to get started. Now, on with the video. As someone who often welcomes change and progress in F1 and isn't afraid to leave traditions behind to open space for possibility, today I'm going to take the unusual route of arguing to bring back something dying out of Formula 1. Corner names. I lament the lack of corner names in tracks over the last 20 years of Formula 1. I'm not sure why exactly that corners have stopped being christened with identities of their own, but as with all things to do with modern tracks, it all seems to have started with Hermann Tilke. Tilke's first major F1 track was the Sepang circuit in Malaysia, which debuted in 1999, just over 20 years ago. It has only recently left the calendar, but it was pretty well loved among modern circuits with its high-speed corners, tricky blind sections and long straights. I've covered Tilke's tropes in a separate video, so won't be going into them again, but despite Sepang having lots of the ingredients to make an identifiably Tilke track, they were a lot of fun corners. The exaggerated S of turns 1 and 2 that dove into a deep gradient after a heavy braking zone, the tight turn 4 at the top of a crest, the fast downhill sections of turns 5 and 6, the almost flat double right through 7 and 8, the downhill hairpin of turn 9, the blind, tightening, incredibly tricky run to turn 14. All of these are challenging, memorable sections of track, but they are just numbers on a track map. Despite having watched F1 for over 20 years, I still had to look these corner numbers up, as I had no idea which one was turn 7, which was turn 10. I only know these corners by look and feel and memory, not by name. Monza is a track of few corners, but we all know the fast opening sweep of Parabolica, the tricky narrow double right that make up the Lesmos, the fast Curva Grande that leads to the calamitous Rogier chicane. Almost every corner at Monaco is a classic and a challenge all on its own, and we've become very familiar with Saint-Devote, Mirabeau, Tabac and Rascasse, not turns 1, 5, 12 and 16. Brazil has Curva do Sol, Decido de Lago, Bica de Pato among its roster. These words don't mean anything in particular on their own. Tabac just refers to an old tobacconist in the corner, Curva Grande means big turn, and Pico de Bato means duckbill, which is pretty cute, I guess. A lot of corners are named after people or places or shapes. It's often a simple, unglamorous affair. There aren't any corners in F1 called Rev Killer or G-Force Extreme or Burninator. Silverstone's corners are named after things like an actual abbey, a farm, a field, a school. These corners don't have to be named by 5 tiers of marketing and PR management to work. You just have to give us, the fans, something to latch onto to give them an identity. Eau Rouge means something. It doesn't just mean red water, but it's evocative of what Eau Rouge is, even if there's a slightly more complex truth to which corner is actually named Eau Rouge. It kind of doesn't matter because the fans and the sporting community have accepted this whole section as Eau Rouge, as its one complete masterpiece. Sidebar here, this is what's known as a synecdoche, when you name a bigger thing after one of its components, like if you call your car your wheels. We know you mean the entire Skoda Octavia, not the 15-inch stock steel rims when you call it a nice set of wheels. Now, let's be clear, there is a reason for turn numbers. Teams, drivers, track staff and race operators all use official, agreed corner numbers when they reference the track, even at circuits that do have these corner names. This makes it easier for everyone to quickly and more manageably refer to different parts of the track, just as they do with timing sectors and marshal sectors. Naturally, turn 6 leads to 7 leads to 8, etc. So if you do need to think about the track in the direction of travel, then numbers are much simpler and less to think about. Yellow flags at turns 12 means you have to think about how to exit turn 11 maybe. If your engineer says you're losing time in turns 5 to 8, then you can quickly think about that in the context of how you're approaching turn 9 or how you're leaving turn 4. Similarly, the marshals and directors will monitor the action as it moves from turn 1 to 2 to 3 and so on. These numbers help you understand the flow of the track and are quicker and simpler to use than a variety of corner names. Not to mention that not all corners do have names and some corner names refer to multiple corners. The Senna S in Brazil is corners 1 and 2. Ascari at Monza is turns 8 through 10. Names don't have to follow strict rules. Though hilariously there is only one anonymous corner at Spa-Francorchamps, and so infamous is this fact that it's now pretty much unofficially known as No Name Corner. So while numbers are useful at a technical level for people operating teams and staff at the track, the numbers are kind of meaningless and cold to viewers, and to a certain extent the drivers themselves. It would be weird if we called these guys Driver 1, Driver 2 and Driver 3 instead of Lewis, Carlos and Dumbledore. I'm sure you could technically do it, but it does strip something away from their essence to do that. Lewis doesn't really mean anything. Well, technically it means warrior, but whatever. But think about the name and face and you feel something. That something is different for different people, especially with Lewis, but putting a name to something starts to lock in associations in your mind. Character, shape, feeling, history. Turns 1 and 2 at Sepang, and indeed their more extreme versions in China, are quite the complex. Lots of action happens here and they are technical, interesting and critical. Why are they just turns 1 and 2? Why can't they be named after something local and Chinese? It would even help us connect with the area or the history of China, should they name their corners after people and places nearby. What about turns 9 and 10 at Bahrain? That's a magnificent piece of track. A fast, downhill, dusty right-hander into a tight hairpin, blind, late braking while cornering, balancing the car to set you up for the back straight. A huge challenge. But how many people know it as turn 10? Let's refer to turn 10 at Bahrain with more awe by giving it a name. I mean, these new circuits are normally in rich places throwing money at F1 to show off their country to the world. Why on earth aren't they giving their corners names that make their country more accessible to this international audience? Use them to tell something about your people and your places and your history. The infamous Turn 8 at Istanbul Park could have been called Ataturk Curve or something after the founder of the Republic of Turkey. Azerbaijan and Singapore both host their races in cities. The places already have names, why aren't we using them? It's madness. Let's look at COTA. Not only does America have a huge history in motorsport, but it's nicked most of the corners from other places anyway, so it might as well name its corners after the tracks it's homaged. And COTA is excellent anyway, so these fantastic corners should all be named. I want to talk about drivers overtaking around the outside of, say, the Phil Hill complex rather than turn 16. And finally, turn numbers can change. Stick in a chicane or change the layout somewhat, and then you have to rejig all the turn numbers. Let's look at Paul Ricard. I know, not particularly iconic these days, but the corners do actually have names here. And that's a good thing too, because the track has like 400 million different layouts and combinations, and every change you make cascades through the corner numbers. A nightmare to keep up with, particularly if you test there or if you're used to it from other races outside of F1. Pretty wild. So, let's get corner names back into F1. I'm certain we'd be much more attached to the new tracks if we gave their corners proper names. Yes, the Tilke tracks can be a bit samey, but it's much easier to pick out and remember the best parts of them if they have an identity. There's a lot of good stuff in these tracks and they're just lost in a sea of bland numbers and nothingness. Okay, maybe not Abu Dhabi, but most tracks have some good parts. It's at this point in a normal video that I'd give you a call to action, but I have no idea how to get corner names back into F1, so maybe shout for it loudly out of your window and hope someone hears it that can do something about it. Especially if you live in Biggin Hill.